The Heckler & Koch HK VP9 and the SIG Sauer P320 compact. A lot of differences and a lot of similarities. Different approaches, certainly different types of design, but both much more the same than you might think. Both 9mm, of course. Both striker-fired pistols from companies much better known for their hammer-fired pistols. Both getting a lot of attention, and certainly both very high quality. So maybe first thing to talk about is the triggers. That's the question I get most often when I'm comparing any two guns is, so what do you think about the difference between the triggers? Which one has the better trigger? I would rate the triggers this way. I would say the P320 has an excellent trigger. I would say the VP9 has a very good trigger. So I have a favoritism for the SIG trigger a little bit, but they're both very good. Again, excellent and very good. Now, one of the things about the VP9 trigger that I've noticed, and I know that the feedback that some other people have offered, both people that I have had shoot this gun and some other people have offered feedback about the trigger doesn't feel quite right, or you know, it bothers their trigger finger. And it will, after a prolonged shooting session, it'll bother mine a little bit. And I think the reason is the VP9 trigger design tends to push your finger to the bottom. So it tends to make your finger want to drag or rub along the bottom of the trigger guard. And sometimes it may even pinch a little bit. Although they do have this little groove or channel in the bottom of the trigger guard that should prevent that. And it does a good job for the most part. But again, in a prolonged session of a lot of shooting, you know, 100 rounds or more, you're going to start to notice this trigger pushes your finger down and just makes it a little sore. The SIG trigger, on the other hand, is a very steady, smooth, straight design. The SIG trigger really keeps your finger exactly where you want it, and it's just sort of a straight pull directly back. So this trigger is smooth and flat and provides just a good natural stroke. Now that said, that's sort of an ergonomic related aspect to the trigger, but as far as you know, conventional trigger comparisons, I still definitely prefer the SIG. It's a crisper and shorter and tighter trigger. It has and all those, I would use those same words to describe the reset. The reset is very short, crisp, and tight. So let's do a quick comparison of the two triggers for their general stroke and reset. So here's the VP9, relatively short take up, only from here to here before I've sort of met my full resistance, and then a nice break. Reset is pretty short, but it's a little bit soft, a little bit squishy, and then you can see that there's a little bit of take up again after the reset. The break is really nice. It's a good trigger. Now the SIG short take up, even shorter till we're at full resistance, and then very, very crisp break. Absolutely no over travel. And the reset, very short. There's no take up after the reset. You are right back at the break point for the next shot. So definitely prefer the SIG. However, I'll talk about this later when I run through specs, but the SIG actually has a heavier trigger pull according to a trigger pull gauge. So the weight of the pull is not always everything. Now, as far as sights go, They both have 3-dot sights, both have that combat style 3-dot sight configuration. Neither of these has night sights. The VP9 has glow-in-the-dark sights. They phosphoresce once they absorb light. If I were to turn off the lights in this room right now and make it totally dark, you would be able to see the 3 dots of the VP9, but you wouldn't be able to see anything on the SIG. Other than that, they're both good sight pictures. The VP9 has that sort of ramped Novak style rear sight. The SIG has a very traditional SIG Sauer rear sight. So those of you who are interested in using your rear sight for an emergency cycling of the slide, you can do that with the SIG. You'd have a little hard time doing that with the VP9. I also found for both of these pistols with the sight picture, I found them to be very good in terms of filling the rear notch really well. They don't leave a whole lot of extra airspace. So ergonomics, general ergonomics, as I said, both of these pistols took a very different design approach. You can just see them by looking at them that they took a lot of things differently when it came to the design of a handgun, but yet they both produced an excellent product. So a lot of it is going to be very subjective. Ergonomics really is almost completely a subjective topic. So I'm going to give you my opinion and what I think, and I'll try and quantify it, or at least qualify it. But you'll have to make up your own mind for yourself. Both of these guns are very comfortable. They're comfortable in slightly different ways. They both have a pretty good arch to the back strap. It's a little more pronounced on the VP9 than it is on the SIG. The SIG has those finger grooves that are kind of nice. They sort of suck your fingers right up into them. They both have a nice undercut on the trigger guard, so I would say they're about equal there. SIG might be a little bit more so. SIG has sort of a semi-extended beaver tail, still on the compact size. Not quite as much as the full size, but it definitely gives you a great area to get the web of your hand up into. So getting a grip on the SIG is very natural, very comfortable, and it's got a good grip texture. The VP9 is just really hard to beat for ergonomics. The VP9 might be the most comfortable gun I've ever held. It just really nails it in terms of fitting the hand. And again, this is my hand. Your mileage may vary, but with the palm swells and backstrap that you can change to 3 different sizes, almost everybody can probably make this feel really comfortable, unless you just don't like that style. If you don't like the style of that low curve on the grip, then you're probably not going to like it. But especially with this rubber talon grip on this thing, it's just super comfortable. You just don't want to put it down. It feels excellent. They both have a fairly understated grip texture, and you can't see the one on the VP9 right now, of course, because I do have it covered up with this talon grip, but it's sort of that, I think I had described it once as bacteria under a microscope sort of look, and I'm going to stick with that. And the SIG Sauer has a texture. Now this is a one-piece molded polymer, obviously, instead of a grip that's put onto an aluminum frame like most SIGs, but this grip texture very much like the E2 grip texture on some of the new SIGs. If you've gotten a 226 or 227, even a 220 lately with the new style grips, this texture feels very much like that. It's not big, it's not knobby, doesn't look like a all-terrain vehicle tire or anything like that. Doesn't look like a motocross tire, but it does the job. When you're shooting the gun doesn't slip out of your hands. It's comfortable, and at the same time, it's not painful to hold. So they did a nice job. Now, one of the obvious differences between these two guns is the magazine release. SIG Sauer, of course, has the traditional American style magazine release right behind the trigger guard, and the VP9 has that European paddle style. People kind of either love them or hate them, or they're a little intimidated maybe by them, but I find it pretty natural to to use, and I tend to just use my index finger to release the magazine. It just seems to be what works more natural for me than anything else. People have talked about using your middle finger, but that to me is that's more awkward. You know, when I'm done shooting and I have to change a magazine, my finger comes out of the trigger guard anyway. So it's pretty natural for me to just do this. To use my thumb, I would have to wrap it way around and really alter my grip. So again, I just find it for me, trigger finger is the best way to go. Now the SIG Sauer, with its traditional grip, has one of the best in the business. SIG Sauer does it right anyway when it comes to magazine releases. They always give you really good controls. This one is certainly no exception to that. It's large. The triangle shape is interesting, but it's well textured. It's got nice deep grooves on it, and it is made of metal. And it's easy to push. You know, it's not hard. It's not like you don't feel like there's a, really stiff spring underneath there or anything like that. It's relatively easy to push and nice positive ejection. So two different ways of ejecting the magazine. Both are excellent. So I would hold both of these guns up as the way to do it with their respective design. Now, folks with fairly large hands, bigger hands than mine, might find the P320 compact in the medium grip frame, which is this, a little bit on the smallish side. For me, it just is about a perfect fit. You know, it's almost like they measured my hand and made this for me, which is obviously makes it feel great. If you've got really big hands, you might find this grip a little bit short. So just know that, and you may want to try one out at the store. Oddly enough, I find this interesting. There's a huge difference in the length of the grip, but these pistols are almost the exact same height. Now that's obviously a difference in bore axis and the height of the slide to the frame and all that, but I just found that interesting. And look how much extra grip you have on the VP9 versus the SIG. The guns are the same height. Controls. Okay, so all the other controls on these guns are also pretty similar. They have a similar design in terms of takedown. They both use a takedown lever. The slide stops on both of these guns, you can see that they're different. They're much larger on the VP9, but for both guns I find them very well placed. Perfectly placed so that I really don't have to alter my grip in order to either lock the slide back or to unlock the slide in both cases. Both of the guns have slide stop, slide release lever on both sides, making that control an ambidextrous control. The VP9 takes it another step with obviously this paddle style design for the magazine release, with the paddles being on either side of the trigger guard. That control is also ambidextrous. So VP9 out of the box is a truly ambidextrous pistol. The SIG Sauer can be right-handed or left-handed by reversing the magazine release. So if you reverse the mag release over to this side, then you've made it a left-handed pistol. The controls on the VP9 to me just seem a little bit more refined, a little bit maybe more quality, but they sort of imply more quality to me. They're a little tighter to the frame and to the slide. They look like they're a little bit more thought was put into them. The controls on the SIG are very good controls, but they're just not quite at that high a level. Both of them, though, very well placed controls, very easy to use, and very effective. Both pistols offer front serrations on the slide, so if you like to do press checks or for some reason you want to cycle the slide from the front, you can do that with both of these guns. No problem. They're both good serrations. They're both very grippy. Now the VP9 adds, at no extra cost, VP9 adds these little ears at the back to aid in the slingshot method of racking the slide, and I find them to be actually very useful. It's one of those things where if they were gone, and you can remove them by removing the rear sight and I think drifting them up and out. But if that were suddenly gone, I would miss it, I think. I actually like that being there. It's kind of neat. Both of the guns have good rail space. You've got a little bit more rail space on the VP9 than you do on the SIG, but either one of these would accommodate a light or laser or something that you might need to mount on the front. Okay, field stripping and cleaning. Both of these guns basically come down the same way. You lock the slide to the back, pull out your magazine, make sure it's unloaded, of course. Turn the takedown lever. Remove the slide. SIG Sauer, same thing. Lock the slide to the rear, drop the magazine, rotate the ginormous takedown lever. No tools needed, no pulling of the trigger. That was an important thing of the SIG. And there we have it. So very similar in this respect. The VP9 on the right, you can see, has a single recoil spring. It's a flat spring on a steel guide rod. The SIG has a dual recoil spring assembly, so dual guide rod, dual springs, and you have a coiled flat spring, and then you have a wound spring. Also steel guide rods. Okay, some of the general specifications. The weights are very close. The VP9 weighs 25.56 ounces with an empty magazine. P320 weighs 25.8 ounces, also with an empty magazine. I talked about the height being extremely close. VP9 is 5.41 inches tall. P320 is 5.3 inches tall. The length of these two guns is also very close. The VP9 is 7.34 inches in length. P320, 7.2 inches long. The VP9 is a little bit narrower at 1.32 inches wide. And again, that goes back to my comment about those controls being a little tighter to the frame and to the slide. P320 is 1.4 inches wide. And I've said it before, but the big culprit to me there is this takedown lever, which is much, much thicker than necessity suggests. VP9 has a slightly longer barrel. It's over 4 inches at 4.09, and the P320 is 3.9 inches long. Sight radius for the VP9 is 6.38 inches, and sight radius for the P320 is 5.8. Significant advantage there, and you can see that with these two guns side by side. If I line up these sights, line up the rear sights evenly, you can see how much further out that front sight is on the VP9. Now, I did some other measurements of my own that I like to do when I'm comparing guns, and that is trigger pull. So I did a 5-pull average for each gun, and I found the VP9 came in at an average of 5 pounds, 15.5 ounces. So just a hair under 6 pounds. The P320, 7 pounds, 8.5 ounces. So 7.5 pounds versus 6 pounds. Pretty significant difference. But I said up front that I like the trigger better on the SIG. I find it crisper and cleaner. So the weight of the trigger pull is not everything. In fact, to me, it's not the most important thing at all. If a trigger pull is smooth and crisp, breaks cleanly, and has a nice reset, that's going to trump sheer pounds every time for me. As is customary for me, I did some accuracy testing with these two guns at 25 yards, just rested on a bag. And both of them did about the same in most respects. I shot 5 different groups, five 5-shot groups, each group with a different type of ammunition. Usually each gun likes a different brand of ammo a little bit better, so it's very unusual for the same ammo to do well in both guns, or to offer the best group. So what I've got circled here is the best group from the SIG P320, and that was from Freedom Munitions. This is the 5-shot group of Freedom Munitions, and that measures 2.335 inches. Again, that's 25 yards. Now the VP9, I actually had to bring the entire target. I had to leave the target on the backer for the VP9 group because 1.5 shots actually went down below the paper into the cardboard, but that did happen to be the best group, even though the entire group was low. So, and this was the Herder's Select offered the best group from the VP9, and that was at 2.406, so just over 2.4 inches. So even though the VP9 has a slightly longer barrel, arguably better ergonomics, the SIG, by just a little bit, produced the better group. But that was on that day, that particular day with this particular shooter under those particular circumstances. Your mileage definitely may vary. So, which one of these is most bestest? Which one would I pick if I had to bug out right now and I could only take one of these? I don't know. I warned you, this is probably not going to come to that kind of a conclusion. These are both awesome, awesome handguns. I love them both. I would hate to have to choose which one to keep, because it would be a sacrifice no matter which one I didn't. So the answer to the which one would I grab question would be whichever one probably was closer to my hand. And either one would be perfectly good. These are both excellent guns. If you're in the market and you're trying to decide between them, and both isn't an option, then God bless you, man, because you got a tough choice ahead of you. Hopefully I gave you enough information to help you with that decision, because what's important to you is probably a little different than what's important to me. So I hope I talked about the points that are valuable to you that would help you make a good decision. But like I said, if you're looking for a 9mm handgun in the medium size, 15 rounds each, I don't think I mentioned that, but these are both 15 round, 15 plus 1 capacity. You can't go wrong with either of these, and I think you'd be really hard pressed to do better than either of them.